Why does saying I rent make people look at you like you've lost the monopoly game of life? I, for one, am really fed up with the shame that is given to us renters. So let me talk you through where this shame has come from, and I think you'll be a little bit surprised. And then we can talk about how we feel about renting and how we can hopefully try and take away some of the stigma of it. In the UK in 2025, it is true to say that owning equals success and renting equals failure. That's the perception of the split between those that own a home and those that don't. So in the research that I did for this video, and I think I'm going to have to read this out to you because I'm not going to get this all out in one go. I discovered that the stigma of renting stems from government promotion of ownership as a mark of success and core aspiration, a view that gained momentum in the 1960s and 70s through policies and media portrayal. So I have made a very short factual video of the stigma origins, and if you don't want to watch it, then please just skip through this chapter. But if you do, here it is. But pre-1970s, while social housing did exist, the stigma attached to it wasn't as widespread. So social housing, just to clear up anything, is council houses in the UK. After 1970, the perception of social housing and renting intensified with a government focus on home ownership, especially in the UK, but I think it also happened in the States and probably Australia and New Zealand. Isn't that interesting that it all started from the government? The government promotion of home ownership as a mark of success and a core aspiration is a view that gained momentum from the 60s and 70s through policies and media portrayal. So this narrative, as I said, cast renting as a temporary or an inferior alternative for a home, linking it to instability and a lack of roots. How odd, in contrast to the perceived security and social status of owning a home. But we all know that there is a security of sorts owning a home, but there are also a lot of worries and potential to lose it or lose the value of it. So isn't it, that's probably why it says perceived security, because it's not, it's not a guarantee once you've got your own home that you're going to have it forever and a day. And it does seem to be a little bit of a nonsense to try and make those that rent their home as inferior. I mean, it's just absolutely crazy. So those ridiculous government policies of promoting home ownership using the right to buy scheme, and that's very much a Maggie Thatcher thing. Not that, essentially that's not a bad idea. I think all people in council homes should be able to buy their home if they can afford to, but to actually keep pushing it seems wrong. And also at the same time, they didn't actually replace those council houses that they sold off. So though, it caused a lack of social housing, which, as we all know, has caused a lot of issues since. And the underfunding and depletion of the social housing stock, which is basically what I've just said, has positioned renting as a tenure of last resort. But in actual fact, it's been the backbone of housing, hasn't it? I mean, if you've not been able to buy your home, and as we can see in the stats, it is, not everybody can buy, and it's certainly not in 2025. So the cultural narrative is being reinforced again by the way that politicians talk about it and framing buying a home as the key marker of social respectability, really, which is absolutely crazy. I mean, everybody knows there's always one home in a street that doesn't look as if it's loved and looked after. So, it's not necessarily middle class respectability from that sense. And obviously I don't want to judge the people living in that one house, because they could be reason, they might just have been able to afford to buy the house and can't then afford to maintain it and look after it. So I'm not taking anything away from these people, but it's just the way that it seems to have been promoted is just crazy. I mean, I wasn't even aware of any of this without doing this bit of research, but it makes perfect sense now that I know about it. Journalists and the TV media have, portrayed buying as far more superior option than renting, when in fact renting is just as good as buying, if that's the only way that you can keep a head over, sorry, a roof over your head for you and your family, your children. So why it's been labelled with a lack of stability was, or is, associated with the instability due to the short lease lengths, the rent increases, and the landlord's ability in the past to be able to end the tenancy without any reason given. To me, that just shows me that the politicians haven't dotted the I's and crossed the T's, because if they were really interested in this, which they clearly aren't, they would have done something about the short lease lengths for a start. You should have the option of doing much longer ones. I mean, I think at the moment it's very popular in the UK to have 6 months or 12 months, but very unusual to have anything longer than that, like 18 months, 2 years, or even 5 years. Um, Commercial properties do it, so I don't understand why domestic don't. Rent increases, well, there should be a law to cap the amount of rent that landlords can increase it by. Obviously, you have to take into account that if they have a mortgage on the property, then they will need to increase the rent to cover that. But then also, they should factor in that in the amount of rent that they charge in the first place, so that you know exactly where you are. So you don't start off paying £500, for example, for 6 months, and then after 6 months it increases up to £800, and the 6 months after that it goes up to £900. You should be able to know what it's going to be for the next 5 years, I think. Otherwise, how are you going to get stability in this? What are your thoughts on this? Do you think I'm right, or do you think I've not factored in other facts that I should take into the account? And obviously, the landlord's ability to end the tenancy, I understand it has now been changed, and they have to give a reason, and they can only be certain reasons that they can end the tenancy. I think that's changed, and I think that's a good thing. But we do also have to balance that out with the landlord's rights too. So yeah, it's a very difficult one. Um, so the economic disadvantage of this, well, everybody knows that, don't they? I mean, renting doesn't build equity or wealth in the same way that home ownership does, because the bricks and mortars belong to that person, or they belong to the bank, depending on how big a mortgage you've got and how far along in your mortgage lifetime you are. Renters pay for their landlord's property. Well, yes, of course we do. We're paying for a service, and the yielding principal and equity to them. So yes, but it's the same as if if you go into a bookshop and buy a book, you don't, you can go to the library and rent a book, but that book doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the library. So they have we don't pay for libraries in this country, but if you do, for example, then yes, the library would get, £5 to rent a book, sort of thing, and then the book actually belongs to them. I suppose we do lose out on tax deductions because we're paying rent, because we have the money that we pay for our rent is actually already been taxed. So I do wonder whether we should maybe get a tax deduction on renting. What do you think? Do you think that's a good idea? Residualisation. That's a very strange word. Well, actually, I think Google's trying to be clever using this word. Um, so social housing, because it's council housing, did become associated with the poorest and most vulnerable. Um, and yes, you can't deny that. And some council estates are awful, but there are some that are not. There are some that are very clean and very looked after, and that's down to the actual council, I think. I mean, there's no reason why council estates can't be clean. If you live in a council house, if you rent a council house or flat, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's down to the government to keep the estates clean, or do you think it's down to the residents? It's a perception that because you live in a council house or council flat on a big estate, then there seems to be a stigma attached to that again, because a lot of people living on council estates, not all of them, are seen as those without aspirations. So that means that they haven't got a job and they've got no intention of getting a job. They're living off the benefit system, which is true some of the time. And some of the time, people can't get jobs. I think the stigma needs to be looked at. Yes, there is a very deep stigma attached to council estates. But it's very generalized, and it's a very sweeping statement. So if the media and the government have not been reinforcing this home ownership as the best thing since sliced bread, I wonder where we would be right now. So the news media, they always promote unfair stereotypes, because I think bad news sells better than good news. So getting their sensationalized stories is contributing to the negative perceptions of renters and residents of social housing. And although some of it is probably warranted, I think most of this stigma is actually not warranted and is very unfair. Not only is there the very deep stigma of living on a council estate, there are others, including those related to poverty, to race, and to class, which obviously do then further make it worse. So finally, there is a lack of tenants speaking up for themselves. I don't watch mainstream TV, but when I did, I can't remember any tenants coming on any of these, like Good Morning Britain, and talking about the stigma of renting or shaming renters. No, but I don't remember anybody talking about it. So the fact that there are not people that are going out at a local and a national level has made it harder and almost impossible to challenge and dismantle the stigmatizing narrative that's out there. So unless we can get the media, which is highly unlikely, but worth a go, or the governments to change their mind, which they're going to have to, because at some point those who rent are going to take over the lead from those that have their own homes, because there's just not going to be any homes left to buy. At the moment, I think they're going to have to step up building accommodation for social housing, and also properties that will be available for private renters. Other countries do it, and I don't understand why we're not doing that in the UK. Anyway, tell me your thoughts, as always. Always be interesting to see other people's point of view. But yeah, isn't it interesting that it actually started with the government? Because I always thought that it would be the estate agents or the real estate agents, for the Americans, pushing home ownership, because obviously that's where they make their money. I didn't understand until I did this that it was actually the government and the media that promoted it. But I think I was very young back in Wendy and the Maggie Thatcher years, and doing all that. Although I knew it was happening, I didn't really take any notice of it. So back to the main video. When you're having these conversations with people and they find out that you're renting, they will generally say, why don't you buy a place? And that piece of advice is generally completely unsolicited and not welcome. So people will say, what you pay in rent, you could pay on a mortgage. Well, that's estate agent maths, and that's used to sell houses. And we have to remember that there are far more costs involved in home ownership than there are in renting. So let's talk about why people do rent. Well, first off, people may not have a job and therefore not able to get a mortgage. Secondly, they may not be earning enough to buy a house and not be able to get a mortgage. Their credit might not be great. But for me, the reason why I got into being a renter rather than a homeowner was due to a change of circumstances. So my backstory, I have owned jointly 4 houses in my life. The first one was a 2 up, 2 down that I purchased with my ex-husband, and I was totally over the moon when we bought it, because I thought that I had now got onto the housing ladder, or we had got onto the housing ladder, and we were set for life. So tick box. When the children came along, we had to upsize. So we then moved on to a 3-bedroom house. Eventually, my ex-husband was doing well enough, and he, not me, wanted to move to a bigger house. So he wanted a 4-bedroom house, so each of the kids could have a room of their own. So we had a very nice executive home on a plush estate. It had a double garage with electric doors. It had landscaped gardens, and it had a conservatory on the back, and it was lovely. However, first curveball hit and we had to downsize. So we moved back to a 3-bedroom house, and then curveball number 2 hit and I left. I'm not going to go into the reasons, but I had no choice. I had to leave, and I had no choice but to go into rented accommodation. The money that I was earning at my job was not enough to get a mortgage to buy a house in the area that I live in or any of the surrounding area that I live in. And I had 2 children living with me, so I couldn't even buy a 1-bedroom flat, not even, I think, a bedsit at that point. So it was renting. And yes, I did struggle with the mental side of this, but eventually I came to realise that I should be proud of myself being able to do it on my own. And I've been renting now for 15 years, and I am still very proud of the fact that I can afford to pay for my rent on my own with no help at all. I'm not going to take anything away from people that have to claim benefits, because you have your circumstances and I have mine. And that's entirely none of my business, and I'm certainly not trying to belittle you in any way, shape or form. I am using my personal circumstances to make this video. So yeah. So changing circumstances aren't just divorce. There are other reasons too. Redundancy is a big one at the moment. If you get made redundant, you may not walk into another job, and therefore you might fall behind with the mortgage payments. And if it gets to the extreme, you could be forced to sell your home and you lose it because you don't have a job to get another mortgage. And that's a curveball that nobody expects, but it's very, very common. Another reason is illness. Nobody can predict, when they're going to get a serious illness. I won't talk about all of the ones, but I'm sure we have some in mind. And you could be out of work for a very long period of time, not just a month or 2. It could be years, with recovery and anything like that. Road traffic accidents can sometimes take years before you're back on your feet again. No pun intended. And there are also people who are lifetime carers for elderly parents or other relatives, and they're unable to work, so therefore they're unable to get a mortgage. So they've not had the chance to get on to the property ladder. And none of these reasons should cause any shame whatsoever to anybody that is forced into the rental market. The cost of a house these days, particularly in the south of England, is horrendous. When you actually speak to a mortgage advisor, most of the time you can't even afford the garage, let alone the whole house. So, not being able to afford a house in the area that you live in is a huge factor. There are also some people that actually choose to rent and don't want to buy, even if they've got the money sitting in a bank account. And fair play to them. Not everybody wants to own a property and have all the stress that comes with it. So let me give you a statistic. In the research that I have been doing, obviously there have been some statistics, and I am denied about sharing them, but I actually find them quite interesting. So you might too. If you don't want to hear them, skip. So in the UK, about 65% of households own their own home. Around 19% rent with a private landlord, and 16% are in social housing. But Germany, interestingly enough, in Germany, the ratio of renters to homeowners is 49.5%, and that is the highest rate in Europe. A lot of that, I think, is down to the fact that the government does make sure that housing is built purposefully for renters, and they have rent caps as well. And I think it's about time the UK government did that too. Home ownership is higher in the older groups, while younger people, especially in cities like London, are more likely to rent. I'm a baby boomer. In the 80s, my ex-husband and I found it really easy to be able to get accepted for a mortgage and then buy a house, because the ratio of salaries to affordable housing was much, much less back then. And I do understand that these days it's a completely different ratio, which is incredible. What we can see there is that we renters are not a rare breed. In fact, there must be millions of us in the UK. If we're looking at 35% of people are renting, that must run to the millions. So we are not alone. And I think we should band together to get some of this stigma got rid of. When you go to a restaurant and you have a meal, nobody ever says to you, well, you're paying the restaurant owner's mortgage. If you go to a high street shop, no one ever says that. If you buy from Amazon, no one ever says that about Mr. Amazon. So why is it when you're talking about renting, people get so emotional about it? It's crazy. So let's talk about why renting is actually quite brilliant. If there's a leaky roof or a boiler breaks down, or in my case, I've just had the washing machine replaced because the heating element went and I wasn't able to dry my bed sheets, then the landlord is liable to that. When my fridge broke down last year, they were liable for that. When the shower went, they were liable for that a few years ago. So, there's no worry. When something breaks down, you just tell the letting agents or the landlord and they are obliged to get that sorted. If you're a homeowner, that cost is down to you. You have to budget for those type of repairs. Sometimes they can be extremely high. If a boiler breaks down, that can be quite expensive, and that's got to be fixed because you need hot water and you need heating. We live in the UK after all. If the tiles get blown off the roof during one of these storms that we keep getting, that's down to you. If you have a water leak, then that's down to you. So we renters have more freedom than homeowners. We are only legally obliged to stay in our chosen home for the amount of time that is needed to give notice. My lease, if I wanted to leave here, I have to give the landlord 3 months notice. So I could theoretically up and move to Scotland or Australia if I wanted to. I just have to give 3 months notice. If you're a homeowner, there's a lot more involved in getting rid of your place and a lot more fees to come to that. My savings are my savings in a bank account or an ISA or wherever I choose to keep it. My assets are not in bricks and mortar, so I can do whatever I want with them. My costs per month are predictable. I know that I've got my rent to pay, I have my council tax, and then I've got utilities after that. I am not beholden to interest rates going up or down. My rent can only be increased once a year because I always sign a 12 months lease. So I know that for 12 months, my rent is going to stay where it is. If you have a mortgage, you are reliant upon the Bank of England or whoever decides these things. It's up to them if it's going to go up or down, unless of course you're on a fixed rate mortgage. But there are other costs involved in, as I say, the maintenance of a property. So you never know what your costs are going to be. So unless you really budget and have money in a pot to pay for something like an emergency repair, you are going to be stuck. I've chosen to live in a very nice area. It's very clean, it's very quiet, and it's very secure. I live in a building that has intercom access, so nobody can just walk in, and I am the only woman out of 5 flats in this building, so I am very well looked after. I also have no worries about whether the house prices are going to crash, and they could do. Houses don't always go up in price, they can come down too. So you can have sleepless nights about that. I mean, I know I did when we owned our own homes and we were going through some economic difficulties. Well, the government was going through, the UK was going through some economic difficulties. And you never know. I mean, there was a friend of ours that had purchased a property with his girlfriend, and they'd paid a considerable amount of money for a home, And then within a couple of years, there was a crash in the property market and they went into negative equity. Unfortunately, a few years later, they split up, but they were still in negative equity. So they had to live together in the same home for a few years until their equity actually went into the positive. So that's something I don't have to deal with. During the research, I came across a very interesting fact that I was completely unaware of. Did you know that some of the wealthiest people in the world actually don't own any property? A lot of millionaires and billionaires actually rent their own homes. And when you add that to all the celebrities that people are so fond of watching, they rent too. They don't always buy. And I actually sat and watched a podcast where one of these wealthy people was talking about the reasons behind him not buying somewhere. He chose to rent and he had a young family. He chose to rent because he said he sees no point in buying property. He said the return on investment is much, much lower than putting his money into the markets, stocks and shares and investments and stuff like that. So I found that really interesting. And it kind of makes me feel a lot better that I'm a renter too. If it's good enough for a millionaire in Malibu, then it's good enough for me here in West Berkshire. So what can we say to shamers? How we can ditch the shame of renting? Well, I'm going to admit that I did ask Google and I did ask ChatGPT for answers because I couldn't really come up with anything. So the first one says, I rent because it suits my life right now, and I like that one. Another one was, I invest in living, not leaking roofs. Third is, I'd rather have financial freedom than be house poor. Or you can flip it and say, well, at least I don't owe the bank hundreds of thousands of pounds. And actually, that's quite a good point. I don't have hundreds of thousands of pounds debt hanging over me. We have to remember that it's nobody's business but ours. We decide what's right for us, and we have to forget what other people say. So that's the advice that I'm going to take on board from all of this. What's the funniest or most annoying thing that anybody's ever said to you once you've told them that you're renting? Pop it in the comments and maybe we can all play a game of Snap. How do we go about stopping the shame of renters? Renting isn't shameful. I mean, I'm quite proud of the fact that I pay for a roof over my head. I pay for a service. It's no different than going to a restaurant. It's no different to going to get your car MOT'd. I get what I pay for. I have the freedom to live wherever I choose. If I get a bad neighbour, then I can just move. I just have to give 3 months notice and I can up sticks and go. If I was a homeowner and I had a bad neighbour move in, it's going to take a hell of a long time to sell that property and move on. And I think these days you do actually have to tell the purchasers whether there are any conflicts with neighbours. So it doesn't always work well in that situation. So what are your thoughts on this? I'm assuming you're a renter if you stayed and watched this to the end. So let me know what your thoughts are and what possibly experiences that you've had. If you're a homeowner and you've watched it because you're interested, I'd like to know what your point of view is as well, and whether I've managed to change your mind about trying to shame any renters, if in fact you did. I'm not saying that you do. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. If you want to watch the original video, then it's up here. So this video was actually requested by a lady, and I want to thank her for giving me the idea to do this, and I'm going to dedicate this to you. So I hope you enjoyed it. So thank you, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.